All right, now let's move on to the fourth and last segment from Thomas Frank, which is about changing perspectives in the Democratic Party and how the Democratic Party has shifted more towards a more professional and elite sort of perspective.
It is this shift of allegiance from the traditional working and middle class to professionals that explains, well, just about everything that is frustrating about our modern day liberalism. I mean, think about it for a second. How do you get a situation like we're in today, where inequality is growing, where inequality is out of control, where this country is headed back to a 19th century pattern of wealth distribution, and the party of the left can't take advantage of it? Where the party of the left is in a state of historic defeat, where the middle class is disintegrating and people are turning to a mountebank like Donald J. Trump. How does this happen? How is this possible? Look, folks, it is only possible when the party of the left isn't interested in its historic mission. That's the only way you get this combination of inequality and defeat. The point that I want you to come away from this gathering with is that this is not a philosophy for tackling inequality or for criticizing inequality. This is a philosophy for rationalizing inequality. These guys don't really have a problem with it. You know, they look at those farmers in Iowa who are watching their way of life blow away in the wind, and they say, well, you know, you should have gone to MIT or something like that. The answer with these guys is always to push the problem back onto you as an individual. This is a philosophy of winners. The Democratic Party is a party that is dominated by winners, people that have done so well in the new economy.
I think that's very good. I'd really like to hear what you guys think about that, because it is true that the Democratic Party has been catering more and more to the upper class, and as a result, Republicans have been picking up an increased amount of working class voters. Democrats have actually been picking up an increased amount of rich voters. Right, and I actually have statistics about this. In 2012, Mitt Romney won those making $200,000 or more a year by 10 percentage points. So rich voters, Romney won by 10 points, which is a significant portion. In 2016, it was essentially a 50-50 tie between Trump and Clinton among those voters. In essence, Clinton picked up 10% of the vote among the rich. And she still lost because there was such a difference in the working class. But I mean, think about that. Even though she had a worse faring than Obama did, she picked up tons of wealthy voters. So, I mean, I think that's exactly what he's talking about, the association of professionalism and corporatism in the Democratic Party. Do you think that's a large reason that they've been losing?
Well, I don't think you can say that Clinton picked up those voters. I would say more that Trump pushed them away by being so populist and anti-big business. So I don't think you can entirely blame Clinton for catering to the rich there. Additionally, in the video, I think Frank focuses almost entirely on economic issues. He's saying that the left should be winning elections based on the economic conditions as they are, but I think that ignores a big part of party politics right now, which is social issues, which is something that the GOP has used very successfully to gain votes in like rural areas. And I think he ignores that factor because a lot of the people who might be very conservative on social issues, a lot of people in the kind of flyover states, they might be the demographic that the Democratic Party would normally be picking up if politics was just based on economics.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point, because I would say that where Trump picked up a lot of those voters, he might have lost some others in his extremism on social issues. But it's definitely true. I do think Frank, I really agree with what he says. I do think he should at least put some nuance there, that it's not all economics. It's like, a certain portion racism, a certain portion economics, a certain portion other things. Like the people who try to attribute it to one factor on any side are wrong.
It's overly simplistic.
Yeah, overly simplistic. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think that's very true. I think it's absurd to say that it was all racist, but it's absurd to say there were no racists who voted for Trump.
Right.
I think it's interesting that a lot of this is about the economic state of the country, and none of it comments really on social issues.
Right.
So I'd like to hear Frank's perspective on, the various social issues and how that has possibly led to the shift right of the Democratic Party. So I'd just like to hear his thoughts on that.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, specifically on the issue of race. Now, I mean, of course, measuring how different races vote for different candidates is not an indication of social issues, because you could vote. Obviously, people of different races vote for a whole variety of reasons. But just to make the point, you have like one of the most racist candidates that we've seen running for office. I mean, I'd say like a lot of candidates have been racist. But he's the most openly and overtly racist, right? He said he wanted to build a wall. He wanted to ban all Muslims, like crazy things like that. Mm-hmm. And he got a higher percentage of the black vote and the Hispanic vote than Romney did. Mm-hmm. So I mean, again, part of that is the fact, or a large part of that is the fact that Clinton lost a lot of those supporters by not drawing out voter turnout, and we'll hear a bit more from Keith Ellison about voter turnout in a little bit. But it's part that, and it's also partially we do live in a racist country. I mean, that's a reason that he won so many white voters as well.
So getting back to the economic side of what Frank was talking about, I think misinformation also plays a role, and that the opinion exists out there that the Democratic Party isn't, trying to get rid of wealth inequality. They're trying to just give handouts to poor people. Right. That exists because of a campaign of misinformation by, obviously the opponents of the Democratic Party. So what you end up seeing is people vote for, Republican senators and Republican policies, which end up disadvantaging them economically.
Yeah.
Right. That's totally right. I mean, it takes a lot of misinformation and a lot of propaganda to get people to vote against their own interests.
Exactly.
I was recently having a breakfast with Keith Ellison. I'm an intern with Keith Ellison, and that's exactly what he said. The most amazing thing about our politics is, especially since the era of Reagan, poor people have been voting against their own interests in favor of Republican policies, at least from my perspective, right? Because when you look at it, obviously, Republicans want to cut the social programs that help all working class people of all races, of all colors, and all middle class people. Right now, they're trying to cut Medicaid. They try to cut food stamps. They try to cut all these social programs. Meanwhile, expanding the military, of course. See where the priorities are. And this is something that somehow has been conceived by so many people as something that will actually help them. Again, because the idea that all welfare goes to people of color. And even if it did, by the way, I mean, to cut that would be hurting those people, of course. So I mean, that's not even a valid argument against. But that's not even true. It helps all people, quote unquote, welfare and social programs and things like that. So yeah, it takes a massive amount of misinformation and slanting, just as you said, to get people to vote against their own interests.
I think that's a good point. I think it's also valid to talk about tactics of fear mongering, just in politics as a whole, because you have people who will vote for a Republican candidate because they talk about the war on terror and how you have Muslims knocking at your back door and immigrants knocking at your back door. I think that's a very powerful thing, and it's more powerful than we're gonna give you jobs. So it's fear is a very powerful tactic, and it's been going on for many years.
Yeah, the same thing kind of applies in when a conservative candidate could accuse a liberal candidate of being soft on crime or something.
Right, exactly.
Just allowing all these murderers and rapists to roam the street, that kind of deal.
Exactly.
In fact, that was a big part of Trump's campaign. He was just saying people are dying in the streets. It was a very oddly favorite phrase of his that he would use a lot. So I think that fear is a big part of it.
Right, and that completely overshadows the actual policy, which is kind of leading into a bigger problem of politics today, is that who's actually paying attention to real policy making, or other, rather than what's going on in North Korea, all the rhetoric going on with that. That's very important.
Right. I mean, how many straight weeks did CNN talk about the missing plane in Malaysia?
Exactly.
Right. I mean, not that that's not a problem, but look, and we have. Have you ever seen CNN talk about the fact that every year in America, 28,000 people die because they can't afford health care? How often do you hear them talk about climate change? We don't talk about these vital pieces of history because it's in favor of sensationalism.
Exactly.
They want to talk about terrorism or North Korea or things like that.
Yeah, they have no monetary incentive to talk about, depressing things or things from the past that America's ashamed of. They have incentive to talk about the types of things that will get people to remain watching,
Right.
So very sensationalist things like plane crashes and stuff, they tend to overcover.